The morning of June 18, 1815, dawned gray and misty over the fields of Waterloo in Belgium. A faint sunlight struggled through the clouds, illuminating a land that would soon be soaked in blood. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made even the birds silent. In the distance, the thunder of horse hooves and the faint drumbeat of the French army signaled the arrival of what could be Napoleon. Bonaparte's last great victory or his final defeat. Napoleon rode along the French lines, his dark cloak whipping in the cold wind. His eyes scanned the horizon with sharp calculation. Around him, generals and officers shouted orders that were half strategy, half desperation. Marshal, the bravest of the brave, rode beside him, helmet streaked with mud, his saber held high. His face burned with courage, but even he could not hide the flicker of fear in his eyes as he watched the Allied positions in the distance. Private Jean, a young French soldier, barely 19, gripped his musket so tightly that his knuckles whitened. His heart thudded in his chest, a drumbeat of terror and anticipation. On the other side, atop a ridge at Mont Saint-Jean, the Duke of Wellington surveyed the battlefield. His posture was calm, almost stoic, but his eyes betrayed the weight of responsibility. Every line of soldiers, every cannon, every square of infantry was under his command. He could feel the collective fear and courage of his men like a pulse under his boots. Sergeant William, standing among the British infantry, bellowed orders. Trying to steady trembling hands and nervous breaths, Private Thomas, a young recruit seeing battle for the first time, gripped his musket and silently prayed, wishing for courage he wasn't sure he possessed. The first shots of the day echoed across the fields. French artillery roared to life, hurling iron shells into the Allied lines. The ground shook, the air vibrated, and clouds of smoke and dirt erupted where the shells struck. The sound was deafening, almost alive, as if the battlefield itself had come to life in fury. Private Jean pressed himself into the mud, heart hammering, ears ringing, while soldiers around him screamed and fell. For the first time, he truly felt the reality of war, chaos, fear, and death all mingled into one. Ney signaled the cavalry. Hundreds of horses thundered forward, hooves tearing into the mud. Men clutched reins and sabers, faces a mix of exhilaration, terror, and raw determination. On the Allied side, infantry formed squares, their muskets raised, disciplined their shield against the charging tide. The horses slammed into the formations, riders shouting, soldiers firing volleys, men and animals falling together into the mud. Private Thomas fired at a French soldier barely 20 paces away, and the world seemed to narrow to that single moment of life and death. Around him, screams, gunfire, and cannon fire blended into a terrible symphony. Amidst the chaos, Wellington remained steady, gave orders calmly, shouting over the roar, knowing that one misstep could turn the day into disaster. He saw his men, young and old, gritting their teeth as the French pressed harder. Sergeant William braced himself beside fallen comrades, trying to encourage the living while mourning the dead. In a farmhouse on the edge of the battlefield, a mother clutched her daughter as cannon fire shook the walls, whispering prayers for the souls of strangers and soldiers alike. The young girl's eyes were wide with terror, and for a moment, the innocence of the world seemed lost to the madness surrounding them. As the morning wore on, the battle intensified. French infantry assaulted the Allied center, muskets firing, bayonets flashing. Exhausted, gritted his teeth as he marched through mud up to his knees. Each fallen comrade was a shadow passing before his eyes. Across the field, Private Thomas and his friends fired volley after volley, some hitting, many missing, their faces streaked with sweat and dirt, fear and determination mingling in equal measure. Then, in the afternoon, the Prussians arrived under Field Marshal Blücher. From the east, their disciplined lines emerged from the mist, striking the French flank. Panic rippled through Napoleon's army. Lieutenant Jean gripped his sword, trying desperately to rally his soldiers, but he could see in their eyes the creeping dread of defeat. The Prussian artillery joined in, hammering French positions, turning the mud-soaked fields into a living nightmare. Napoleon tried to rally his forces one final time. He ordered a last cavalry charge, a desperate attempt to break Wellington's lines. Hundreds of French horsemen thundered forward once more, their faces twisted with courage and fear. Allied infantry held their squares, firing relentlessly. Horses fell, men fell, screams filled the air. Sergeant William shouted encouragement through the din, blood and mud streaking his face, refusing to let the line break. Private Thomas, chest heaving, saw friends die around him, some screaming, some silent, some simply swallowed by the mud. By late afternoon, Napoleon realized the day was lost. His army, exhausted and broken, began to retreat. Private Jean stumbled through the mud, barely able to move, yet alive. He looked back at the battlefield, at friends and foes alike lying motionless, and felt a hollow emptiness. Wellington watched the retreat, his own face lined with fatigue and sorrow. Victory had been won, but at an unimaginable cost. Soldiers from both sides lay scattered across the fields, and in their eyes the living and the dead was a reflection of humanity itself. Courage, fear, hope, and despair intertwined. Night fell over Waterloo. Fires burned among the remnants of the French army. The cries of the wounded mingled with the night wind. Soldiers lay on the ground, staring at the stars, wondering how they had survived. Napoleon's dreams of empire had been shattered. Wellington and Blücher, victorious but weary, surveyed the battlefield, understanding that history had been made at the cost of thousands of lives. In the silence, a young drummer boy, barely 14, covered his ears as the distant explosions faded, tears streaking his dusty, soot-covered face. Medics carried the wounded, exhausted but unwavering, while survivors from both sides trudged through the mud, haunted by what they had seen. The fields of Waterloo would remember this day forever, not for the triumphs of generals alone, but for the courage, fear, and sacrifice of every human soul who faced the storm of war. And so, the Battle of Waterloo ended, leaving behind a scar on the land and on the hearts of all who survived. The ghosts of that day Napoleon, Wellington, Ney, Blücher, soldiers, medics, civilians would linger in history, in memory, and in every story told about courage and the cost of ambition.